As you turn there, I'll remind you what we covered the last time, which was in holy submission to human institutions, to our masters. We conform to the life of the Christ narrative and fulfill Isaiah's prophecy. That was the wonderful bit of treasure scripture that we covered last time, was how Peter explained how Isaiah's prophecy of the suffering servant is first completed in Christ and finally completed in us. We are the wayward sheep that were gone astray, but now we have come under the shepherd, the suffering servant, who, giving his life, being happy to the Yahweh, being pleased to bruise that sacrifice, gave him the bounty of the whole world. If you read Isaiah 53 and then also into the next chapter 54. And so that's where we've come from. Now we're going into another discussion of submission. And this time it is wives to husbands. So with that in mind, would you please stand for the reading of God's word? In the same way, you wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, as they observe your pure conduct with fear. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on garments, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible quality of a lowly and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being subject to their own husbands. Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You have become her children if you do good, not fearing any intimidation. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. And Lord, bless the reading of his word. You may be seated. Thank you to whoever did the slides this week, putting 1 and 2 together. That's actually very, very useful. In the same way, you wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, as they observe your pure conduct with fear. Holy wives are to be subjected to their husbands. We begin with this important point. Be subject to your own husband, your own husbands. In the same way. In the same way as what? In the same way that slaves are to be subjected to their masters, in the same way that citizens and subjects are to be subjected to the governing authorities. That is to say, there's nothing very novel here in what Peter is instructing wives. He is simply saying, as slaves are to be Christians, as citizens and subjects are supposed to be Christians, so too you wives are Christians. This is a manner of Christian behavior, which is revealed in submission to authority. But a point, again, is to your own husbands. That is, a woman, wives, are not subject to every single man who exists. They are rather subject to their own man. Now, this has become quite a controversial point in recent time. And it's actually, I don't know if it's necessarily feminism that was the issue so much as the Industrial Revolution, in which women were now going out into the workplace. Well, now, women were in this place of a slave, in which they are subject to a man other than their husband. But when it comes down to it, they are subject to their husbands first. And this is a matter of governing authority. That the husband, the father in the household, is a governing authority. And that is why she is to be subject to him in the same manner, as said just before, as slaves to masters and subjects to governing authorities. In similar manner, the King of England, King Charles III, cannot decree to us here in Masaryktown or Florida, you must all drive on the opposite side of the road like we do here. Why not? Well, he is not our king, is he? He's the king of Great Britain. We are citizens of the United States of America. We are subject to our own government. Now, if we were to go over to Britain and, we're in their land and laws, it's their home, it's their say. But this is the same idea and principle here, that the wife is subject to her own husband. She is not subject to all men. She is only subject to one man, her husband. Now, it's followed up with this point. Same way, you wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, as they observe your pure conduct with fear. Won by conduct. Here we have a kind of missional and ministerial wifing. All right? That converted men, statistics show this, and if a man converts over a household, it is almost likely that the entire household is going to convert with him. Okay? So there's been a lot of push. We need to convert the men. We need to target the men. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But just because men engender converted households, we must realize that the Bible points out that wives convert those men. Wives convert those men. This is the context here. Peter's working with the early church. And what is the early church mostly made up of? It's mostly made up of slaves, whores, and women. And so the expectation among the churches is going to be this. There's going to be a lot of Christian women with a lot of pagan husbands. That is going to be the setup. And that has historically played out mostly true as well. The women will convert first, and the men will follow. Important point in Peter's message here, which unfortunately is very much lost in our culture today, in that idea of missional and ministerial wifing, is that difficult marriages can, in fact, and might more likely be won in the kitchen and at the table than as equally at the pulpit. That wives, being pure and fearful, that is, driven by the fear of God, not driven by the fear of men, or a man in particular, is a priest. The wife is equally a priest in the household. You understand? We see that a little bit later, at the very end of our passage this evening, where Peter says, you men, remember, honor your wives because they are co-heirs. They are co-heirs to the grace of life. But they're co-heirs to the grace of life. What does that make them? What does that make every one of us? We already read. Peter didn't single out. He didn't say, okay, the men are kings and priests of our God. He said, you, plural you. All of you, God bless you, all of you are kings and priests, a royal priesthood. And so, while before the Levites were exclusively male, in the new covenant, wives are also priests. Because of this, they must protect the sanctity of the house, as the house has become a place of worship. And Peter explains that this is the temptation of women, the temptation of godly women even. Listen here. Victory in the household is not through feminine dominion, rather feminine fidelity. When I was going to Trinity College of Florida, I had this assignment that was talking about whether or not a Christian wife should listen to her husband, that with an unbelieving husband on matters. And so frequently, what it came down to was, a good majority of these people in my class were females themselves, it was caveat this point until it meant nothing. That is to say, oh, well, because he's an unbeliever, XYZ, 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 I don't have to listen to him. I don't have to obey him. I can circumnavigate what he says. But that is not what Peter's call is to wives. Peter's call to wives in unbelieving unions, unequally yoked marriages, is to be strong, courageous in their submission. And we'll get that a little bit more, but I want to continue in the text. Peter is going to return back to this point in a moment. But first, in verse 3, he says, your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold, jewelry, or putting on garments. Peter says, beloved wives, women, you must not be about gaudy adornment. That is superficial, look at me clothing. This external conceit is an attempt at the winning of human reputation. You might consider in the picture here of a wife and her husband that the wife is attempting to seduce her husband through these external means as opposed to just submission to her husband. That's the idea. The picture is of empty tabernacles. That is a kind of tabernacle that has all this beauty, all the gold, the braiding, the wonderful adornment of all the fruits, the pomegranates, the beauty of the tabernacle, but as if the Holy of Holies is vacant, is absent, as if there is nothing on the inside. That is the picture. Remember, women are consistently used as the picture of the tabernacle, and in particular, the Holy of Holies. Women are the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle. And so the picture, once more, is like that of the Proverbs. The woman folly. This is the adornment of the harlot. The adornment of the harlot, and this is idolatrous abuse of the woman engaged in idolatrous abuse. Now, I want to make a point here. Well, actually, I'll make it momentarily. The braiding hair, gold garments, this is pursuing status over holiness. Peter and Paul also brings this up. If you recall when we went through 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul also uses a similar admonition. Women are particularly tempted towards this, to think that external looks are what is equivalent to our worth. And so the pursuit of status for being seen is what women are looking for. However, I must say, in this day and age, in a growing number of effeminacy among men, I think the warning could be just as sad for men as it is for women here. That there are men who perhaps not braid their hair, but they have to get a particular kind of haircut. And I can't recount how many videos, especially Brother Logan has shared with me of people getting what would be the word, flamed for bad haircuts, and it's like the end of the world for people. And you see men crying over the state of their haircuts. Gold watches, that kind of apparel, and if there isn't something to be said about shoe culture among men, that's your garments. There's all kinds of ways in which our society has put worth into external looks. And it used to be a pretty feminine trait, but it has become a masculine issue as equally. As, like I said, the world is becoming more and more effeminate as of recent. And so the point goes to all us men too. Do you men suffer from thinking your worth is found in external looks? So there's I believe, a name for that. Which is I'm not really sure what the sexual part has to do, but it's a metro. a metrosexual. It's the one who is very concerned about how they look. They exist. And they exist to varying degrees. Not everyone is as, far vainly corrupted by that as others, but I think in our society we are all pushed toward those ends. Pushed to think that our worth is found in how we look. And most especially that is true of women. And so Peter says, don't fall for that trap. Don't fall for the trap that says your adornment must be the braiding of the hair, the wearing of gold jewelry, and the putting on of gaudy garments. But rather, verse 4, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible quality of a lowly and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. The hidden person is what Peter is concerned about. That is, modesty, meekness, and concern for others. These things are imperishable, or incorruptible, as the Legacy Standard puts it. Worldly beauty, that is perishable. It is always fleeting. I actually took a little bit of joy in this, and maybe I shouldn't have, but I admit it to you. I took a little joy when I would teach high schoolers of Heraclitus, the philosopher who really, in antiquity, we can deal with the first existential crisis of time. You never pass over the same river kind of idea. And for the boys, it was good enough to take my old granddad's pocket watch and twist it up and make them listen to a minute, every tick of a minute, until it passes that minute mark and say, that minute's gone, will never come back. That was enough for them to get it. But, women, they didn't like that one as much. And so I'd say to the women, just like I said, I took a little bit of joy in it. It's fun. But I said, at this very exact moment, though you cannot see it, micro wrinkles are growing on your face. And those micro wrinkles are going to grow into big wrinkles. There is an inevitability about time. We all grow old, we all age, and the beauty of a in their prime 20-year-old, male or female, is not quite the same beauty as an 80-year-old male or female. Worldly beauty is always fleeting, but the hidden person, that modesty, that meekness, that concern for others, that selflessness, that remains. Peter also adds that they are lowly and quiet in spirit. That is, they refuse to take undue charge. They are putting their faith in the Lord. And again, I want to say, because we do have women in the crosshairs here, I also want to put the men in the crosshairs here. Do we look at our sisters in such a manner? Our wives? Our daughters? Do we seek that their beauty be modesty, meekness, and concern for others? Or do we entice our sisters into thinking that it is better to be gaudy, better to have these external looks over and against modesty, meekness, and concern for others? Do our joys and compliments to our sisters go towards their looks or to their character? I'm not saying you can never say, hey, honey, you look pretty today. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, do those comments outweigh the comments of modesty, meekness, and selflessness? Why? Again, you remember the picture here is all eyes upon the gaudy woman, all eyes upon the woman who is status showing. The meek, the mild, the lowly, the quiet, she is the one who is precious in the sight of God. The only eyes that matter, the eyes of God. There is immense value of women before the Lord. And women, it's not your clothes. It's not your jewelry. It's not your makeup. It's your lowly and quiet spirit. And as I said at the start, the lowly and quiet spirit is not a unique thing to women. It is a Christian thing. Rather, what is being called upon here by Peter to women is that they put on the vocational dress of Christians, that is, wearing Christ's garments. And what I mean by vocational dress is this. You don't see it too much anymore, especially with more and more the folks in here. Most of your jobs are at home, and so your vocational wear is probably like sweatpants and whatnot. But it used to be pretty common to know of a work uniform. You would wear something that would say, I work for this company, or that company. I'm an Amazon driver. I'm a Target employee. I'm this or that. I'm a plumber of, John and John's Plumbing. You wore a vocational dress that made it clear that you're, one, on the job, and two, are representing this company. Well, all Christians at all times are called to don that vocational dress of a Christian. Called to wear Christ's garments. Women in particular are being called here, but this is true again for all of us. That we all must wear Christ's garments. And we read last time what those garments look like. I'm going to reread that passage so that you might be remembered of it. For to this you have been called, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps, who did no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth, who being reviled was not reviling in return, while suffering he was uttering no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that having died to sin, we might live to righteousness. By his wounds you are healed. Those are the garments that you wear. Sacrificial, loving, suffering, righteous, glorious. Those are the garments which we wear. And Peter does not leave it there, but gives us an example of the holy matriarch, Sarah. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being subject to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You have become her children if you do good, not fearing any intimidation. Notice Peter's words here in verse 5. Who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being subject to their own husbands. The adornment is through submission. Now let's take the case of Sarah, which we are given here. Because Sarah explains to us what submission looks like among wives. It's not being a doormat. It's not being passive. It is not being fearful or frightful. Quite the opposite. Sarah followed Abram and Abraham in his following of the Lord in some extremely dangerous situations, in situations that often put Sarah in more danger than Abraham. She was filled with courage. She was filled with encouragement to her husband. Now, perhaps in the back of your mind, everyone's thinking, well, yeah, what about that time with Hagar? All right. They slipped up, but so did Abraham in that. Abraham was no, perfect saint in the midst of that either. He listened to the voice of his wife when he should not have. But Sarah is a holy matriarch. We're not to take her as some typology of someone who was evil or someone who was wrong. Quite the opposite, Peter shows us. She is the woman of old, which all Christian women ought to look to, in the same way Christian men ought to look to Abraham. The faith of Abraham. The faith of Sarah ought to be important to Christian women. Because if they do good, they become Sarah's children. I hope that sounds familiar. You are or you're not Abraham's seed, right? That's covenantal language. Those who believe by faith are of the seed of Abraham, right? That same language is being employed here specifically and uniquely to women by taking his wife, Sarah. You'll be Sarah's children if you do good. That is, you will participate in sacred narrative. You will no longer be subject to culture. You'll no longer have to worry what Vogue magazine, I don't know if anyone reads that anymore, but what Vogue magazine says women's standards look like. I know this one. What Pinterest says, or Instagram says women ought to look like. What beauty looks like. You get to participate in a narrative that surpasses all of that. Give Instagram 50 years. I'm not trying to make a prophetic declaration, but I very much doubt it won't exist. It'll be gone, surely replaced by something else. And the beauty standards in 50 years will make us all very confused, as the beauty standards of the 80s and 90s make us look and go, what? Peter says, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Calling him Lord. It's a really easy verse to twist, misunderstand by a lot of people. Some people look at it and say, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, out of the Bible. Don't care. I'm not going to read that. That's not feminist. That's misogynistic, Peter. That must have been an old thing. And then others might read it and say, well, wife, you'd best start calling me Lord around here. But Peter's language here, of course, Abraham said, Sarah called Abraham Lord. This is true. But I want to remind you of these words. Very powerful words from the first minor prophet, Hosea, chapter 2, verse 16. And it will be in that day, declares Yahweh, that you shall call me husband, Ishi, and will no longer call me Lord, but Ali. Women, when you call your husband Lord, what you're really doing is saying, you are my man. You are my Ishi. And Ishi, you remember, is Ishnish, right? This little flame becomes big flame, right? That's the Adam and Eve before they get the names Adam and Eve, right? When they're just called man and woman. Little flame becomes big flame. That's your man. You no longer have this list of Baali. The fidelity to the one man she is covenant with. That is why you call your husband Lord. This is a loving relationship, not as the Gentiles, Lord, as Jesus said. It's not domineering. It's fidelity. Consider the relationship of how God uses that marriage union in the book of Hosea. How he makes his prophet marry a harlot. How he tells his prophet ahead of time, she's not going to be faithful to you. You're still going to love her. And you're going to do this because this is my picture to all Israel of my love to my bride. And are we not called, as Paul says, are we not called, husbands, to love our wives as Christ loved the church? As Christ loves his people? As God demonstrates his love? And if these things come to pass, we have this promise. You have become her children if you do good, not fearing any intimidation. What a striking end to that section. We've just gone about, hey, don't wear, excessive clothing and jewelry and the like. Be subject to your husbands. Call him Lord. Oh, and by the way, don't fear any intimidation. I think that's an important note. Because some could read this through and come across, and through reading it, that women are supposed to be some of these, weak, yellow-bellied kind of nothings. Just sort of exist. But rather, they're not to fear intimidation. That is, there's no intimidation before the pagan. When you are subject to your husbands, wives, there's no fear. Because you're subject to him in the Lord. I want to make the point, then, that verse 1 says, in the same way, you wives. In the same way, you slaves. Do not fear intimidation. In the same way, you subjects and citizens of nations, do not fear intimidation. Your submission to your government, your submission to your masters, your submission to your husbands is in the Lord. Therefore, there's no fear of intimidation. You are in the hands of God. You do not fear the intimidation of Pharaoh when he steals you into his harem. Or Phicol of the Philistines when he tries to steal you into his harem. Happens twice. Then it happens again with Isaac. There's no intimidation before the pagan. And so Peter ends off with one verse to men. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman. And show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. We could understand this as a description of husbands, live with your wives in a Christ-like way, as he is knowledge and understanding of God. And I think there's truth in that, but I think it's a little bit more human in that you are to share life together with sympathy and attention to the weaker vessel. That women are supposed to receive from their men loving kindness, so a kind of lovingness, and consideration. That is, right, men, take notes, listening and observation. Those are the means in which you live in an understanding way. By listening and observing. This doesn't turn you into, again, a sort of passive character in your marriage. You're still the leader. But you have an understanding way. You're listening to the voice of your wife in her concerns, in her weakness. And you are observing her weakness so that to these ends you might honor her. The weaker vessel speaks of not simply feminine vulnerability, though it is true. I don't think I'll have many pitchforks or torches thrown at me for saying this, but it needs to be said. Women are the weaker vessel. What that means is that women are more vulnerable. The scourge of feminism has told women they are stronger than they actually are. And it has put them in dangerous situations. And you see it. I saw a horrible clip the other day of a female British police officer who got punched in the face. I've seen also male officers who get punched in the face, and they don't quite like that. But what was her reaction? She was bawling, screaming in terror over what happened. Why? Because she shouldn't have been in that position to begin with. She should have never been allowed to be put in that situation where she might be harmed, because she is a weaker vessel. Weaker vessels not only describes their vulnerability, though. The reason why that clip should be so enraging to us is because women are precious. Women should not be getting punched in the face. They're a precious thing. The idea of a weaker vessel is not an item of or a cause for domineering, but for protection. This goes along with Peter's point, to show her honor. Men, the means through which you show your wife honor in particular is ensuring her dignity before all people. That, for one, looks like not abasing your wife in public, but it's also not accepting abasement of your wife in public. You honor her. You protect her honor. You make it known that you do see her. And you won't let others look at her in an undignified way. To these ends, Peter says, all of this seems very external, right? But suddenly he ends it on this note, that your prayers be not hindered. The spiritual life will be affected by broken relations of any kind, but especially with our wives. Our love for our neighbors will affect our love for God. And as Matthew Henry so eloquently places it, wives are our closest neighbor. They're our closest neighbor. He uses the imagery of Eve coming out of the rib of Adam so that she is under his arm, but by his side. Kind of picture. Closest neighbor. Your prayers be not hindered. Paul speaks of something somewhat similar in 1 Corinthians 7, in relation to husbands and wives not depriving one another, except for a time for the sake of prayer. There's this idea that through deprivation, the prayer, the spiritual life will be affected. And so husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing her honor. Wives, be subject to your husbands. And God help us that we don't take the bite away from either of those commands. The command that we caveat to extinction the command, be subject to your husbands. In the same manner that we ought never to caveat, not that I see it, but just as a saying, that we may never caveat husbands live in an understanding way. Well, you don't understand. She's a pagan. Peter doesn't care. God doesn't care. Live with her in an understanding way. Honor her in an understanding way. Pray for her in an understanding way. Our applications. First, submission to proper authorities is a means of kingdom advancement. I discussed the government and slaves, but in particular to our context this evening, how important it is to understand that wives, when you submit to your husbands, even the unbelieving kind, perhaps even especially the unbelieving kind, you are advancing the kingdom. You are advancing the kingdom. Never take that for granted. Second, submission is not being passive, but it's being courageous in the Lord. It's trusting the Lord. For wives with believing husbands, especially, pay attention to this point. Submission is not blindly following your husband. It's following your husband trusting in the Lord, which means your husband has right to make dumb decisions. He is. And it's not your place you can give him wise counsel and tell him, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. At the end of the day, you submit to his decisions, not the other way around. The husband does not submit to the decisions of the wife, but the wife submits to the decision of the husband, trusting in the Lord. When wives choose to trust themselves over their husbands, they not only tear down, as the Proverbs say, they tear down the walls of their own house, They destroy their marriage. They destroy their families. But if you're submissive, you will build up your husband, even when he makes bullheaded decisions. Third, headship is not for dominance, but for honor and glory. Again, this is applied widely. The authority given to government is not for the domination of subjects. The authority given to masters is not for the domination of slaves. And the authority of husbands is not for the domination of wives. It is rather for honor and glory. As John Winthrop preached, God has made, in accordance with his providence, both superior and inferior, and none of which are exclusive, but needs must be together. That the inferior requires the leadership of the superior, and the superior require the hands and work of the inferior. They both are in need of each other. And headship is a means of honor and glory, but it is perverted by dominance.